2 students, 2 teachers killed after authorities say a 14-year-old opened fire at a high school in Winder, Georgia, Wednesday morning. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation identified the students killed at Appalachia High School as 2 14-year-olds, and then there were the 2 teachers. 9 others, including 8 students and 1 teacher, were injured and taken to local hospitals. They are expected to recover. The suspected shooter, Colt Gray, now in custody. He will be charged with murder and will be tried as an adult. And we're learning that federal investigators had been contacted through the National Threat Operations Center in their anonymous tips program in May of 2023, reporting that there were threats posted in an online gaming site warning about a school shooting, and it also included photographs of guns, but they were not able to determine any probable cause, and no action was taken.
Yeah, the father said that he had guns in the house when he was interviewed at the time last year, but that they were inaccessible to his son. His son denied making the threats. Obviously, it seems like he probably did make those threats and then, sadly, yesterday carried them out a year later.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder, like, what's the follow-through on a situation like that?
Know.
You know, do they monitor the situation? Do they keep looking into him? Or do they just say, all right, nothing to see here, and they move on?
We've got 2 really great guests coming up. This hour at 7:35, we'll talk to a former FBI special agent about that. And then in the 8 o'clock hour at 8:35, we'll have Catherine Schweit on. We've had her on a number of times. I always feel bad reaching out to her because I always reach out to her after a tragedy, after a mass shooting. She put together the active shooter program that the FBI uses, and so she's an expert on all of this kind of stuff. So I'm sure she'll be able to answer some of those questions for us. But what stood out to me, there were a couple things. First of all, 14 years old. Just feels like they're getting younger.
So young. I know it's crazy because I have a 12-year-old son, and to think about a kid that's, just a little bit older than him doing something like this, It's insane.
Well, I mean, he was 13, this alleged shooter, when he allegedly made those threats.
Yeah.
So just how a 13-year-old's mind ends up in that place. I mean, you can't tell me that it doesn't have something to do with being online and social media and seeing the things that these kids see.
Yeah, I think that has something to do with it. I think you always have to look at the parents and what kind of home this kid is being raised into.
But what's he doing with an AR style rifle?
Right. Well, obviously he managed we don't have all the information yet, but I mean, I'm going to assume at this point, I think it's a pretty fair assumption that it came from his house.
His house, because his father admitted, when they investigated and looked into him last year, that he had a gun in the house. So it doesn't take rocket science to figure out that's probably where it came from. He had access. Yeah,
I mean, he's not going to a store and getting that, and he's not going, I don't think this 14-year-old's going to some, van in a back alley that sells guns. I mean, it seems like it probably came from his house. But putting all of that aside, just for a kid of that age to not only have that idea in his head, but then to go and carry it out. I mean, I don't know. When I was going to school, you had some fights and stuff like that. I don't remember. We never worried about this.
Yeah, no, it just didn't go to that level.
No.
Yeah, like in high school. Yeah, there would definitely be fights. Kids didn't get along with each other, bullying. But to take it to that extreme, it just wasn't something that we ever thought about.
No. And I want to play a clip. Vice President Kamala Harris was doing a rally in New Hampshire yesterday talking about a new economic policy she was rolling out, but she did discuss the Georgia shooting, and she said this, and I thought this was interesting. This was her talking about the time that she spent with young people across the country.
One of the things that I asked every time I went to the auditorium, and it would be filled with these young leaders, students, and I'd ask them, raise your hand if at any point between kindergarten and 12th grade you had to endure an active shooter drill. And for the young leaders who are here who are raising their hand, I'm telling you, every time the auditorium was packed and almost every hand went up. A lot of us, I'll speak about myself, we had, I grew up in California, earthquake drills, we had fire drills, but our kids are sitting in a classroom where they should be fulfilling their God-given potential, and some part of their big, beautiful brain is concerned about a shooter busting through the door of the classroom.
And look, all politics aside, I mean, it's a legitimate point. I never had an active shooter drill when I was in school, and we've talked about how sometimes these active shooter drills, are they doing more harm than good? But it sounds like these students in these classrooms in Georgia, they did the right thing and knew what to do.
They knew what to do
because of
it. Yeah. So at my son's school, and I'm guessing they do this at a lot of schools, they don't call it an active shooter drill.
Okay.
They'll call it a fire drill, and they'll call it a lockdown drill. But they are very careful. And I have the email right here from my son's principal saying we are very careful not to call it a shooter drill. They call it a lockdown drill.
Well, you know what was happening.
The kids know, but then there's also kids like my son who he knows about school shootings. I had to take the time yesterday to make sure he did not see any of this because I don't want him worrying about
the anxiety.
it. So I think it's better for those kids who are nervous about it already to just call it a lockdown drill, even though they do know what it is.
You know what's happening, though? Kids with their cell phones in school would call the parents saying that there was either a drill or an actual active shooter situation, and the next thing you know, you have panic in the community.
Yeah.
Another issue that they're thinking about with getting rid of the cell phones because they don't want kids to create false alarms.
Right. There were some kids, though, I think, and this might be part of the reason that some parents want their kids to have phones. There were some kids that were texting their parents saying, I love you.
Yeah, I read one where one of the kids said something like, I'm sorry I haven't been the best daughter, or something like that, like she thought she was going to die. Yeah, it's really, really sad and scary.
It is. All right, let's get to one other story real quick because this one is trending and
yeah, this is something. So a man complained of pain on his left side, goes to a doctor, and the doctor says, well, we're going into surgery, apparently to remove his spleen. The guy never comes out. Turns out the doctor at Ascension Sacred Heart Emerald Coast Hospital in Miramar Beach now being investigated for removing the wrong organ. 70-year-old Bill Bryan had his liver removed instead of his spleen.
Whoops.
Now, Dr. Thomas Sheknovsky is facing an investigation and a likely lawsuit. It's not the first time for Dr. Sheknovsky. He settled another case back in 2023. And as you might imagine, the relatives of the victim are furious. They're like, what kind of a doctor would remove an organ that's essential to life? You can't live without your liver.
Right.
So why would you remove that? Why would you even attempt that?
Yeah, how does that even happen?
Did he not know the difference between the liver and the spleen?
I think they're very different looking, and he's a doctor, too.
Like if you put them both in front of me right now, I probably wouldn't know the difference, but I'm not a doctor. I'm just a dopey
I'm thinking of that, plastic model they had in the class where you're looking, okay, the spleen. All right, that's that, long, skinny thing, right? I have no idea what it looks like in surgery, but it doesn't matter. This guy is supposed to be a trained medical professional.
Well, and if he already had a claim against him for another incident, how is he still able to do that? And it reminds me, remember we did that story a couple weeks ago about the doctor who was doing a colonoscopy and didn't have his hearing aids in, and the patient woke up and started screaming.
Oh, man.
And you think this guy cannot practice medicine again, but instead he was going to have to do some type of re-education classes and be supervised in surgery before they would let him do it again. It's crazy. You can just keep your medical license.
I mean, this guy's already got a knock against him. Do you think he said to anybody in the operating room, hey, this is the spleen, right? Is it the liver?
Spleen? Yeah. What are we doing here?
Well, the family said they were suspicious because they wanted him to go back to their home in Alabama where they have doctors that they know and just have the procedure done there. And apparently this guy's like, nope, we got to do it now. And we saw what the results were.
Unbelievable. Chris Trankman with today's top stories. Chris, thanks so much.
Thank you.